Hey guys, it's April 24th. Thought I would sit down and answer a few questions that I've been asked, as well as some of my friends that are realtors are being asked. Most people that live in our area, which is the Cumming, Alpharetta, Suwanee, Sugar Hill, Milton area, that own real estate are curious and want to know what impact this COVID-19 is having on the real estate market. This is usually the hottest selling cycle. And up until about 2 months ago, this was set up to probably be one of the best selling cycles in my whole career, which started in 2003, obviously. But the four questions people seem to be asking are: one, how does the economy affect real estate? How does this specific economy affect the value of my home? The second one is, are we going into a recession? And again, what impact does that have on my home value? Third is this going to be like 2008? I can tell you I was in this business in 2008. A lot of us got hurt in 2008, and we don't want that to happen again. I'll be able to kind of at least tell you my thoughts and what I'm observing. And finally, what about all the job losses that we have going on right now? So first of all, is the economy going into a recession, and how does that impact the value of our homes? Well, first of all, people primarily talk about three types of recoveries of us coming out of this. The first one is kind of like a V shape. And if you kind of think of a tennis ball, right as you get it out of the packet, you drop it, it hits the pavement, comes right back up quickly. That's kind of a V-shaped recovery. That is the best case scenario. And if a V-shaped recovery takes place, then that will be about as good as it can be. The second is a U-shaped recovery. That's where one, if you take a tennis ball, you drop it down and it might come up, half as far as the V. Basically, the economy stays down longer than a V-shaped recovery. It's much flatter, but it does come back up after a certain period of time. And then the third is an L-shaped recovery, which really isn't a recovery. It just goes down and it stays down. So if you kind of think of that, what we're looking for is a V-shape. And as of April 15th, you can see that the major financial institutions, the majority of them were calling for a V-shaped recovery. You can see that in first quarter, right over in this area, we definitely had negative economic growth. Second quarter, which is what we are in right now, is going to be negative economic growth. And that right there meets the definition of a recession, which is 2 quarters back to back, where we have no or negative GDP growth, which is obviously the gross domestic product. It's the value of all the products produced in America. You can see that Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and Morgan Stanley all are thinking that in Q3, we will get back to an economic growth. The only one who's not projecting that as of April 15th is Wells Fargo. But you can see by Q4, all four of these major financial institutions are predicting that we will be back to economic growth. Now, naturally, that depends on the virus and the brilliant doctors that we have working not only in the United States, but throughout the world. But that is, as of the 15th, what these financial institutions were predicting. Now, why do they think it's going to be a V-shaped recovery? It's worth looking back at history to place a potential impact of COVID-19 empirically. In fact, V-shapes monopolize the empirical landscape of prior shocks, including the epidemics such as SARS, the Hong Kong flu, which took place in '68, the 1958 Asian flu, and the 1918 Spanish flu. It's interesting, the Spanish flu obviously, went on for about 2 years, and they never were able to develop a vaccine for the Spanish flu, and we just developed the immunities for that. Again, historical analysis shows that pandemics are usually V-shaped, recessions that recover quickly enough to provide little damage to home prices. And some very cutting-edge search engine analysis by our information management team showed our current slowdown is playing out similarly thus far. Now, this is a report that was put out by John Burns Consulting. Who is John Burns Consulting? They are the consulting firm that a lot of the big box builders will use when they're trying to predict what the future holds. So the home appreciation adjustments, what people were predicting before and after the pandemic, you can see that pre-COVID-19, the general consensus was we would appreciate 4.7% on average, 3.8% next year. 2022 was not included in the projections at that time. After COVID-19, you can see The major financial institutions, again, are projecting 3% this year, still with COVID-19, 4.2% next year, and still 4.6% the following year. Here's John Normand, who is a strategist at JP Morgan. He said COVID-19 recession might only be 1 or 2 months old, but a few signs of the always hope for a V recovery are starting to emerge. That makes me feel really good. So then a poll was taken between April 15th and April 20th with 45 economists, again, put out by Reuters. And you can see things started to deteriorate a little bit. 22 are now predicting a U-shaped recovery, with 10 out of the 45 believing that there'll be a V-shaped recovery, 7 being a check mark. So I guess you can actually say a check mark is kind of like a V, it just takes off. That would be 17. 5 a W shape. Well, that's a new type of recovery. That would be maybe the economy has something else that happens that takes it back down, like maybe a second outbreak or something along those lines. And then obviously 1 said they have no idea. I love the Pricewaterhouse survey from leaders of a cross-section of the industry. They asked, if COVID-19 were to end today, how long would it take you to basically estimate that you get your company back to business as usual? You can see on March 15th, 66% thought it would take them less than 30 days, and 24% thought it would take 1 to 3 months. As of March 29th, 2 weeks later, you can see 36% less than 30 days, 40% 1 to 3 months. And then the most recent was April 14th. You can see 22%, less than 30 days, 1 to 3 months is 39%. And again, that was a survey that was done again in April. Here is what Goldman Sachs wrote April 14th. If policymakers manage to thread the needle between the continued virus control and the gradual reopening of the economy, the level of GDP growth should begin to move higher in the months ahead. Again, that would be the V-shaped, and that is what we all are hoping for and working towards. So then the second question is, are we going into a recession? How does that impact our home values? Well, the definition of a recession, I've already shown you. Yes, we're going into a recession. I think everybody's pretty positive that second quarter will show negative GDP growth. We haven't been working. It's almost the end of April. But the thing to remember about this, that recession does not equal a housing crash. And most of us will remember the 2008 to 2010 time period. That was not a housing crash. That was basically a hurricane is what it was. It went through the housing market. Here's what Mark Fleming, the chief economist at First American, wrote. He said, many still bear the scars of the Great Recession, and many expect the housing market to follow a similar trajectory in response to the coronavirus outbreak. But there are distinct differences that indicate the housing market may follow a different path. While housing led the recession in 2008, 2009, this time it may be poised to bring us out of it. And that's one of the biggest differences is, the housing market, the mortgage, the banking industry was right ground zero in 2008. Here, the housing industry, the mortgage industry was actually strong going into it. The economy was very, very strong. Big difference than what it was like 10, 12 years ago, with the exception of 2 recessions, the Great Recession of 2007 to 2009, and the Gulf War recession from 90 and 91. No other recessions have impacted the U.S. housing market, according to the Freddie Mac Home Price Index data, which has been collected since 1975. So that means of all the recessions that we've had, only 2 have had a negative impact on the value of real estate. You can see again, we all still, remember 2008, where home values during that recession went down on average, about 19.7%. But if we go back and we look at the 4 prior recessions, you can see that 3 of those 4, the average price of the home value actually increased during them. So just because we go into a recession does not mean real estate values will crash. In fact, the data shows 4 out of those 5, again, 2008 was the perfect storm, in my opinion. It almost took down the whole banking industry. But again, that does not mean it's going to crash values. I'll give you an idea of what we're seeing in my immediate area shortly. Is this going to be like 2008? You can already tell that I do not think it is. And here's some of the reasons that I don't think it will be. If you go back and you look at the 6 years leading up to the housing crash, you can see that the average appreciation from 2000 to 2005 went from 6.5% to 12.5%. If you looked at the average increase of wages during that same time period, they were nowhere near that amount. That's the definition of a bubble. If you go back and you look at our last 6 years, you can see that we went from basically 4.4% appreciation to 6.4% appreciation. The highest level of our last 6 years does not equal the lowest level of the preceding years between 2000 and 2006. So what does that mean? What that means is that the housing bubble becomes even more apparent when you look at the historic data for the Mortgage Credit Availability Index. What this means is how easy is it to get a mortgage? There was a joke that went around that all you had to do was be able to fog a mirror to be able to get a loan back in 2004 to 2006 and 7. And you can see that's how this yellow line measures how difficult it is to get a mortgage. The higher it is, the easier it is. So you can see that once we started going through the recession, the ability to get a mortgage became much, much more difficult. And you can see it really hasn't loosened very much since then, anywhere near what it was like in the 2004 to 2006. So what that means is this vintage of mortgages created here is a much cleaner, much more solid vintage from a credit risk perspective to the banking industry. So what does that mean? What that means is, 2005, if somebody could buy, let's say, a $400,000 house, back then you could get a mortgage for $500,000. You get a mortgage up to 125% of the value of your home, and people were taking out equity. They're using their homes as piggy banks to buy cars, to go on vacations, to buy beach homes, to buy trailers, to buy all types of things. And so what happened is, if you bought a home for 400, you went out and you leveraged it up to 500, and then the home value goes down 20%, you had people that would just walk away from their homes. And so that's what led to this very much a buyer's market from about 2006 to about 2012. The red area is considered very much a buyer's market. If you look at the inventory is basically the number of homes that are currently on the market divided by the number of sales in the prior 12-month time period. And so you can see in 2010, we peaked, there was a 12-month supply of homes on the market. That meant that if no additional homes came on the market, it would take 12 months to work through that inventory. Anything over 6 months is considered a buyer's market. Anything less than a 5 month is considered a seller's market. So as you're looking at the housing market today, you can see that it's very much a seller's market. Again, this is looking at a macro level. You have to look at price points and areas to really extrapolate that to your specific situation. But overall, from a market perspective, there is not a glut of inventory. And that's why what you're seeing today is you're seeing sellers not giving up on price. They're still fighting, and you're not seeing people collapse. Whereas back in 2010, if I went and I listed a home, and I sat down and I told the sellers, hey, 45% of the homes in your neighborhood are either short sales or foreclosures. Do you want to move, or do you want to sit this out? It was a very, very different environment than what I'm seeing today. Also, just to look at the amount of cash out refis and the equity removed from homes the 3 years preceding 2008, you can see $824 billion were taken out in home equity loans. Now, if you go back and you look at the prior 3 years, you can see $232 billion, which is just a fraction of the 800. And you can see the last 3 years, we don't even equal 1 year of the 3 years preceding 2008. So as a result of that, 53.8% of all homes that have mortgages, all homes in America have at least 50% equity. Those people will not be walking away from their homes if the value of homes happen to go down, which I'm not seeing yet, but it could happen. 37% of all homes are owned free and clear in America, and the average equity is about $177,000. Big difference than when you go back and you look at all the cash out refis that took place the 3 years before the last collapse.